Morning, everybody. This morning I was studying in Genesis chapter 21 and 22, and one of the things that I read, I wanted to kind of clarify um, something that I think a lot of people don't really talk about or really break down when studying the Bible. And I think we should really be careful about how we explain certain things in the Bible. And so I'm just gonna bring this one up. Sarah tells Abraham, "Hey, I really don't want Isaac to share, or I don't want Ishmael to share in Isaac's inheritance." And she's kind of distraught with the fact that Ishmael's running around and Hagar's still running around. And I can understand that as a wife, having a problem with another woman and the child from that other woman being there. And so, God tells Abraham, you need to do what your wife says needs to be done. Well, then Abraham does something pretty despicable. He sends a woman and a child out into the wilderness with just enough food and water that they get into trouble. And she ends up getting so bad in trouble that she lays the Ishmael down and she prepares to have him die, and God has to intervene. And my point today is this: just because it's in the Bible does not mean that God condones it. In fact, the Bible's authenticity is backed up by the fact that there are so many mistakes in the Bible that are recorded from what people did and how people did things. We can actually trust the Bible more because it includes those things that are embarrassing to those who wrote it or those who were in the stories. The story with Lot and his daughters. There's other stories. There's a scripture that talks about dashing the enemy's babies' heads against rocks. I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't think God condoned anything like what happened with Ishmael. In fact, God intervenes for Ishmael and his wife because Abraham didn't do it right. Abraham was rich. He could have sent that child off with a camel or given them a place to live somewhere else. He could have worked a little harder to make sure that they were taken care of, and he didn't. Does that mean I hate Abraham or I think that he's not blessed of God? No. I mean, that's not the way God treated him. And that's not for me to judge. I wasn't in that situation, but I will say that, one of the things that I've come across in my past is when I try to bring the gospel to people, they say, well, look at this horrible stuff that happened, how they treated women in the Bible and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, you're right. There's some things that happened in the Bible that should not have happened. But the difference is, does God condone those things that happened? Or did they happen despite what God would have really wanted? Did God want Ishmael and Hagar to sit in the desert and die? No. In fact, he intervened and made sure they had water and helped them live in the wilderness, which means the desert, which is kind of interesting. And Ishmael grew up to be an archer and other things. But, the authenticity of the Bible, I think, is backed up by the fact that the books contained within also contain things that are not flattering to those who were writing it or those who were in it. And I mean, there's all kinds of weird stuff, running around the city naked. If God called him to do that, he ran around the city naked. Well, you got to believe if a man decided to run around for a year or so in town, it's probably because God told him to, especially if it's, one of the prophets. But then there are things that happen, like with Lot and his daughters. God never told his daughters to get their father drunk. It's just what they did. I mean, they were people. There's sin recorded in the Bible. Not everything that's there is something that's condoned or something that God wanted. And I want you to think about that in your own life. If someone to write a book about all the great things you did for God, but they also included your mistakes. What kind of things could I be talking about in that book, or could be talking about in that story? Just be aware when you're teaching the Bible that there are things that are a little tough to try to explain, and that's because the Bible's not just everything God condones. It's also stories of real life that happened. And it would do you good to put yourself in the situation of those who were talked about in the Bible. You'll learn a lot more. That's what God gave me this morning. God bless you guys.